I'm on a mission to find out more about this extraordinary battle of Imphal and Kohima. Accompanied by experts, we'll be crossing plains, venturing into the hills and jungle, and we'll be the first historians to ever visit many parts of the battlefield, which incredibly have been forgotten since 1944. I'll be revealing the truly epic tale of one of the most decisive battles of World War II. This is the story of Britain's greatest battle.
This is modern-day Calcutta. It's the capital of West Bengal and home to nearly 15 million people. Today, it's an army of tourists that are drawn to the city's rich heritage and culture. Back in 1942, the world was a very different place. In Europe, the Second World War was heading into its third year. Britain was standing firm, but across the Channel, Nazi Germany dominated Europe and had begun making inroads into the Soviet Union and sent forces to North Africa. With so much focus on the war in the West, it's important to remember that this was a world war in more than just name. The United States had entered the war in 1941, following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And while the Allied forces were growing noticeably stronger at home, things weren't going quite so well in the Far East. In February 1942, Singapore fell to the Japanese, marking the largest surrender in British military history. The Japanese wave swept westwards, pushing the Allied forces out of Burma and back into British India. 6 months later, at the end of 1942, the British tried to re-invade. It failed dismally. The Japanese plan to stop the British from ever retaking Burma was working.
But General Mutaguchi Renya, the commander of the Japanese 15th Army, had much greater ambitions. He was convinced that if they could invade India, then the rest of the country would rise up, and that would lead to the complete collapse of the British Raj. Then what was the jewel in the crown for the British Empire would become the jewel in the crown for the Imperial Japanese Empire.
Mutaguchi wasn't wrong. India represented Britain's last pillar of strength in an area they had until recently dominated. Nor had the British retreat been limited to Burma and Singapore. Hong Kong and Malaya had also fallen to the Japanese. Defeats that were not only humiliating, but denied them precious resources. After the disastrous Arakan campaign, things had gotten so bad that many of the British Army commanders, who hadn't already been killed or captured, were sacked. We're travelling to Barakpur, a suburb to the north of Calcutta.
Oh, we might actually be able to go in. It's the grounds.
And the site of the Army headquarters for Lieutenant General Bill Slim. He was the man appointed as acting commander of the Eastern Army.
There we are. This is through which Slim would have driven? Wow.
And was charged with picking up the pieces from the abysmal showing in Burma.
Look at this.
Yep. We're in Barakpur, and this is the old Eastern Army headquarters, and you can see around here old Nissan huts, old military buildings. It's amazing. Whew. Look at this. It's rather incredible, and you know, I can hear voices from inside. So someone's obviously living or working in here, but you can imagine what it must have been like in its heyday in the 19th century. But for me, it's very exciting to be here, to think that this is where Slim began orchestrating the great fight back. You know, this is where he planned it. And this is where he worked out his master plan of how he was going to bring victory to Britain and defeat the Japanese and one day reconquer Burma.
It's important to point out that this is very much a road trip with a camera and not a conventionally planned film shoot. Some of the things we encountered on our journey were just incredible.
I've come here on a complete punt. I had no idea whether we were going to even be able to get to the house, but I've just walked in. No one seems to be batting an eye. You can see there's some workmen here, so I'm encouraged that they're obviously doing up the place because it needs it. God, you know, once this would have been so grand, now it's home just to roosting pigeons. My God.
Just like these former headquarters today, in 1943 the Eastern Army was completely gutted and rebuilt within the shell that remained.
Wonderful marble floor.
The changes went all the way to the top. In August, Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten, cousin to the King, was appointed Supreme Allied Commander, Southeast Asia. On October the 22nd, he travelled here to meet his new acting army chief and survey the size of the task ahead.
It was after talking to Slim here at Barrackpore that Mountbatten turned to him and said, "I want you to be my new army commander." Slim was completely taken aback by this. It went against all the protocol to make such a snap decision. But Mountbatten insisted. He said, "I'm the Supreme Allied Commander. I can appoint whoever I like, and I want you." It turned out to be the best decision he ever made.
Slim wasted no time in getting to work on rebuilding his army. The newly named 14th Army. And on formulating a plan that he and Mountbatten hoped would revive Allied fortunes in Southeast Asia. What Slim came up with was bold, daring, full of risk, and unlike anything ever put forward by a British general before. He planned to lure the Japanese into a trap, goading them across the Burmese border to attack the 14th Army in British India. Once separated from their supply lines, his plan was to hold them, defeat them, and then completely annihilate them. By any standard, this was a daring plan filled with jeopardy. What made it even more audacious was that in the autumn of 1943, he didn't yet have an army capable of pulling it off. Before General Slim could put his strategy into action, there were operational issues that required urgent attention.
And he reckoned there were 4 key challenges that he needed to overcome. The first was logistics. The distances involved were just enormous and the infrastructure just terrible. The second challenge was to overcome the problems of disease. There were any number of horrible agues that could be caught by his men, but the worst unquestionably was malaria. The third challenge was training. Slim recognized that the fighting skills of his army just simply weren't good enough. And the fourth challenge, and perhaps the most important of all and hardest to overcome, was the problem of rock-bottom morale in the army. And Slim recognized correctly that unless that improved dramatically, they were never ever going to beat the Japanese.
When you change one style of war fighting.
One of my travelling companions is Slim's biographer and former infantry officer Rob Lyman.
The success of the 14th Army wasn't.
He understands better than most the unenviable task that was facing the general.
And it's worth stressing, isn't it, that in August 1943, when he takes over as Commander of Eastern Army, British fortunes in the war against Japan are absolutely rock bottom. There is no further depths they can plummet.
It's true to say that there were many people, both in Dalian and London, who assumed that we had entirely lost, that there was no hope of recovery. And Slim recognised that everything about this army would have to be new. It would have to be new in terms of its thinking, its commanders, its equipment, and where it was.
And let's just think about logistics. I mean, the distance we're talking about are just vast. I mean, in Burma itself, there's almost no roads at all.
There are only two ways really of getting to the front from here, and the first is clearly by air, but even in 1943, the air resources for Eastern Army, then 14th Army, were very, very small indeed. In fact, you could describe them as minute. The other, of course, is by rail, but there's only one railway line from here up to the Brahmaputra.
Let's just talk briefly about training, because that's one of the other challenges that he realises in the summer of 1943 that he needs to overcome. The quality of the training is just not good enough. And when you look at the Arakan campaign in early 1943, what's happening is they're fighting a traditional kind of European war where they're just throwing battalion after battalion at a fixed Japanese position. No infiltration tactics, nothing like that. And it just doesn't work, does it?
Training suddenly became tough. It was hard, it was relentless, it was ruthless. It was also highly disciplined, and you can see this writ large in all the memoirs of soldiers involved at the time. They trained hard, and the principle was, if you train hard, you'll fight easy.
Yes. And of course, you know, the other thing is making sure they all do proper jungle training. So it's that asymmetrical warfare, as we call it in sort of, you know, modern military jargon, that Slim is trying to impose upon his army and which hasn't been there before.
One of the great things about the Japanese in 1942 and 1943 is their ability to use psychology to win their battles. The most important thing for Slim was to demonstrate to his soldiers that actually they could do the same thing to the Japanese.
Well, this is the point about morale. This is the fourth most important challenge that he has to overcome, of how to get an army there where morale has fallen to rock bottom. How do you lift it up? How do you make them believe in themselves again? And a key part of that is, I mean, just through training, morale is going to lift. People believe him, don't they? And Man does the same, to give him his due.
And they believe him because he doesn't talk with any spin. He's a man of action, Slim. He says, right, I'm going to move. As soon as his position as commander of the 14th Army was confirmed, he got all his troops, his entire headquarters, and sent them 400 miles towards Imphal to Kamila, much closer to his forward troops. If you're stuck back here in Calcutta, you're surrounded by staff officers and depots and administration and all that sort of stuff. Leadership is about being part of the formation you're leading.
It wasn't just himself and his headquarters that Slim moved forward. Just feeding the army was an enormous challenge. The 14th Army was made up of men from a number of different races and creeds that required as many as 30 different ration scales every day. As a simple but incredibly effective solution, Slim made sure more food was produced nearer to the front. He also introduced malaria forward units a short way behind the front line. Rather than spending months recovering back in Calcutta, it meant that soldiers could be back in line near to Imphal within a couple of weeks, improving both treatment rates and morale. Slim was making good progress with the 4 preparatory problems he'd set himself. He could now start work on putting his master plan into action.
We've arrived in Imphal on election day, so it's pretty busy, it has to be said. But it all adds to the general hubbub of the place, and it's good to be walking around. And actually, not only is it election day, it's also Holy Day, which is a festival of colour, one of the festivals of spring here. So everyone does look spectacular, it has to be said. Okay. Are we going to be able to squeeze in?
In 2013, the Battle of Imphal and Kohima was declared to be Britain's greatest battle by the National Army Museum in London, finishing ahead of D-Day and Waterloo. Insurgency has meant that this part of India has been closed off to Western travelers until very recently. Those who fought here during the Second World War are often referred to as the Forgotten Army. But as borders begin to open, we can start building a fuller understanding of what happened here. Imphal is located in Manipur, in northeast India. What made it a prize asset for the British and a prime target for the Japanese was its natural geography. The town lies in a flat plain, perfect for airfields. It's surrounded by hills and great for defense. In 1944, Imphal was reliant on its air supplies and the one single road leading to the railhead and supply base of Dimapur, 140 miles to the north. For the British, it was the most obvious route into Burma, just as it was the easiest route into India for the Japanese. With the accolade of Britain's greatest battle, I'm not spoiling anything by saying it's a clash where the British Indian forces ultimately prevailed, but it was a close-run thing. What I think is so great about this battle is not just the result, but how each side pitted itself against the other so brilliantly. This story is an epic clash of armies executing the competing master plans of two visionary generals, Mutaguchi Renya and Bill Slim.
Slim was determined not to fight the Japanese where he was forward. His positions were forward on the eastern edge of India, along the Chinwan, where it would be difficult for him to resupply his forces, and when they couldn't reinforce each other, they couldn't support each other.
Yes, they're not mutually supporting at all, are they?
Absolutely, absolutely.
You know, because this is a big old chunk of land.
It's a massive area. And what he wanted to do is to move the 17th Division back into Imphal and the 20th Division back from Moray on the Tamu-Palal Road. But the critical thing here is that he didn't want them simply to retreat. He wanted them to fight a fighting withdrawal all the way back to degrade the Japanese. This is going to be stepping back one defensive position at a time to degrade their fighting capacity, so that by the time the Japanese got back, their supply lines were extended and they were exhausted, and our supply lines were getting shorter, and we were being reinforced all the time. The great success here in the Indian divisions is that they fought tenaciously all the way back. They knew they were fighting to win, and by withdrawing they were winning, because they understood the plan. Slim knew enough about the Japanese and was smart enough to realize that he needed to attack the enemy's weaknesses, and also by constantly reinforcing by air power the Imphal base.
What exactly is Mutaguchi's plan?
Mutaguchi's plan was to secure Imphal here and prevent the British from using this as a base to reinvade Burma. But in order to do that, clearly he needed to send troops into Imphal, but he also had to cut the main road from Dimapur, known then as Manipur Road, which runs through Kohima and into Imphal. Now, the really interesting thing about Mutaguchi's plan, of course, is that the Japanese had signed off the attack into Imphal and Kohima, but Mutaguchi realized that actually the key to the linchpin to the British defense was Dimapur.
So let me get this absolutely right. So if your headquarters in Tokyo, what they're thinking is this is an operation to prevent the British from being in a position to attack Burma. So in effect, it's a defensive, offensive operation.
Absolutely, well described. It's an offensive, defensive operation.
Whereas for Mutaguchi, the prize is the biggest of all.
That's it in one. That's why Dimapur is such an incredibly important position, and how few people, Mutaguchi understood it, Slim understood it, but very few people realize as well. And this is an example in military strategic thinking, where Mutaguchi was thinking at a strategic level. Everyone else on the Japanese side was thinking at an operational level. What did I need to get into Imphal without actually looking beyond Imphal to what the real strategic prize should be? And the first essence of generalship is understand what the strategy is. What's the strategic prize? And they all failed. That was the failure of Japanese generalship in the Far East, in this part of the world, in 1944-45.
The Japanese objective of Operation Hargo was to take Imphal, but Mutaguchi was convinced that if he could also take Dimapur, then the gates to all of India would be open. He believed that Assam would be conquered, Bengal would revolt against the British Raj, then so too would the rest of India. The humiliated British would be forced to withdraw, leaving the Americans exposed and much closer to making terms with the victorious Japanese. Meanwhile, the British had plans of their own.
This is the Tiddim Road and it leads south all the way into Burma. And it was back up here that General Punch Cowan's 17th Division fought a fighting retreat to within 10 miles of Imphal.
Slim's strategy was to lure Mutaguchi's army into North India, to attack them much closer to British supply lines. It was a high-risk, high-stakes plan and was tested from the outset by a series of near disasters. Slim had anticipated an attack to the south, starting on March the 15th, but the assault had begun a whole week earlier. The Japanese 33rd Division was making moves to outflank and block the retreat of the 17th British Indian Division. Their commander, Punch Cowan, understood what was happening and ignored direct orders from IV Corps not to start the fighting withdrawal.
As far as I can make out, Punch Cowan's never been given the credit he deserves for this, but he was the man on the spot and he trusted his gut instinct. And you know what? By pulling his troops back when he did, he unquestionably not only saved the division, but also averted the first major disaster of the battle for Imphal.
The delay caused by the fighting withdrawal along the Tiddim Road and the damage inflicted across 3 weeks of brutal combat meant the Japanese 33rd Division no longer had the strength to push on through to Imphal. To the south of Imphal, Slim's plan was working.
I think this is probably a Japanese boot as well, actually. On those soldiers would not be able to move.
In 1944, fighting dominated this whole landscape.
Well, we've just climbed up from the plain below up to the top of the Shenam Saddle. This is called Recce Hill, as it was known by the troops. The saddle's actually more of a mountain pass. It's an amazing place. I mean, the views are just incredible. Burma's kind of 40 miles that way. And if you want to get into that country or back from it, this is basically the only way you're going to be able to do it. And you can see so clearly. I mean, this is why walking the ground is just so important, because here we are on the saddle. This is the kind of the great barrier between the Imphal plain and Burma, and there is the plain, and just beyond that is Imphal. It's absolutely incredible to be up here. You just get this amazing sense of scale and the size of the place. I mean, the saddle itself lasts for about 4 miles or so. You can see the road just passing around here. That is the road. That is a very historic one. I mean, it hasn't changed at all. We are literally traveling in the same footsteps of those who moved up here in 1944. There's always something amazing about being where people have been in the past, where great events have taken place. And you know, it's a peaceful day now. It's all very, you know, the sky is blue and all is right with the world. But back in 1944, in the spring of 1944 and early summer, this was the scene of some of the most bitter fighting imaginable. And what a place to be dug in, eh? I mean, you know, supplying this place is really difficult. Tough for the British, but at least their supply lines are quite short. Really tough for the Japanese, though. I mean, their supply lines go right back into Burma. You can see how up here you very quickly start degrading your ability to fight, because, you know, those supply lines are just so hard, they're so long. You know, how do you get food up here if you're the Japanese? You haven't got any mechanization. It's all got to come on foot or by mule train. You know, they're running out of water, they're running out of ammunition, they're running out of food. This is a place you do not want to be in those circumstances.
It's a very small hill, but you had the Japanese on one side of it, and the British and the Indians and the Gurkhas on the other side, and the two sides stayed.
Also travelling with me is historian Hemant Singh Katoch.
So Hemant, we're on the southern end of the Shenam Saddle, and this is the scene of major fighting, isn't it?
It is. In fact, it's one of the major scenes of fighting during the Battle of Imphal and Kohima. And it saw close quarter fighting for over 4 months, just right behind you there.
And the view I'm looking at, would this have changed much?
No, and that's the thing, it hasn't. You know, if you were to match a photograph of what they might have of this battlefield in 1944, as I said, give or take a few cleared fields and some less trees, but otherwise, no people, still looks pretty much the same as it did.
So if I'm a British soldier dug in up here, what I'm looking at now is what they would have seen then?
Without the Japanese there, yes.
Yeah, without being shelled and mortared.
Yes. Yeah.
Why is this place so significant?
Well, this is the main approach to Imphal from the southeast. It's not very far to the Chinven River from here. This is one of the main routes taken by the Japanese to try and get to Imphal. If you look the other way, you can actually see the Imphal Valley. So if you can get past this collection of hills, there's nothing to stop the Japanese from getting to the valley and going straight to Imphal.
So this is the last barrier?
This, in the southeastern sector of Imphal, this is the final barrier, and you're on it.
And so what happens is, because hadn't Gracie intended to fight a little bit further forward than this?
He had. I mean, that was the original defensive plan for the southeastern sector of this battle. It was to have their final defensive position beyond this range. But as things developed at the end of March and early April, one of the brigades that was here needed to be sent to Imphal. And the moment you send one of the brigades here, everyone's got to withdraw a little further back. And their last withdrawal point is the Shinam Saddle. So this is where they had to make their stand against the Japanese.
So it's hold this or the floodgates open?
Absolutely.
The defence put up by the 20th Division was out of all proportion to what the Japanese expected. This whole feature saw scenes of devastation comparable to the Somme.
Literally everywhere you go on this hill, there are dugouts and trenches, and I can honestly say I've been to so many Second World War battlefields, but I've never seen one quite as well preserved as this. I have to say, it really is just extraordinary to be here. You know, here's just another little dugout. They really are all over this hill, and it's just such a privilege to realise that we're among the first Western historians visiting this site since the end of the Second World War. And you can see why they're positioned where they are, because that's where the Japanese are coming from, towards us here, and you just have the best view imaginable. And you also have to remember that most of the fighting, the close quarter hand-to-hand fighting, took place at night. During the day, you'd be crouching here, mortars, artillery shells coming in and taking cover from that. And you can imagine sitting here thousands of miles from home, your nerves would just be taut, wouldn't they? I mean, you'd never be able to relax. The cumulative strain of being up here in this position, it's incomprehensible. It just defies understanding, really. So while the British and Indian forces were holding the Japanese onslaught here, yet more Japanese troops were bypassing this whole feature way to the north. And if there was one flaw in Slim's plan, it was that he'd fatally underestimated the strength and scale of the Japanese attack.
Motoguchi's men were now attacking from all around. Slim later described the Imphal battle as being like the spokes of a wheel, with Imphal the hub. By the beginning of April, Japanese forces were attacking down a number of these spokes, including, most worryingly, from the north. However, one of Slim's ace cards came in the form of a further element that he and Mountbatten had identified as being crucial to the fight: to win command of the skies above the battlefront.
Well, these rice paddies here were flattened out by the British and turned into one of the 6 airfields around Imphal. And this is why the siege was possible, because air supplies were coming in and constantly resupplying the town and the men around about. Of course, conversely, that's precisely why the Japanese wanted to get their hands on it. Deny this one bit of flat ground around this northern part of India, and the British just simply can't get back into Burma. That's the key to this.
Control of the skies was hard won and achieved by bringing Spitfires all the way over from Britain, as well as the radar and ground controllers required to marshal them. Spitfires were superior to the Japanese Oscars, and once vectored towards enemy planes, they soon won the battle for the air over Imphal. as Slim continued to transform his new army. What I find impressive is not just his strategic thinking, but also how adaptable his army became in making their conditions and equipment work in their favor.
Here you go.
You knew they were coming. We knew they were coming, and we had a pretty rough idea of where they were coming
So here's the
from.
border, which is over there, running that way,
just like
north to
parallel
south,
to the
roughly.
south.
There's the Chindwin coming down here. So they cross. So Nigel, the Lee Grants were really good for Burma because they were absolutely, you know, they weren't one of the things that was a disadvantage in North Africa was the high profile and the 75mm gun lower down. And it didn't really work on those sort of big open space of the North African desert. But here, where it's close quarters and where you're coming up against predominantly just infantry with sort of mortars and machine guns and the odd kind of, you know, battalion gun.
Kamikaze suicide bombers
Yeah,
on here.
but they're really, you know, they're absolutely perfect because they've got this big old 50 cal machine gun and a 75mm bunker buster, and it's just what you want. And quite often they use the 50 cal more than they did the main gun. Because they go out here and they'd just be spraying this all the time. They're absolutely fine here because over 800 yards is not a problem at all. And what they used to do, if they knew Japanese were up on a ridge like that, what they'd do is they'd move up down at the bottom, quite often rather than going onto the very top. So just spray it, absolutely just spray it, and the infantry would attack along that way, and they'd be down here just going boom, 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 boom.
And in the battle, so it's not just the artillery.
Clever use of it.
High velocity crack. We can walk a bit further to
So Imphal is just about 10 miles over that way, and this is the closest the Japanese ever managed to get to the town itself and all the supply dumps and airfields that go around it. The fruits of Mountbatten's decision to bypass the Chiefs of Staff and just agree to what Slim had asked and divert all that air power from operating over the hump really was borne out here. And here you can see it, Nungchagum. This is where the 5th Indian Division, which was the first entire division ever to be flown into a battle, this is where they first saw action. And of course, 5th Infantry Division had already had a huge amount of experience in those early battles in the Arakan at the beginning of the year. So they were hardened, experienced, knew how to take on the Japanese, knew how to win. And those were the guys who on the 13th of April 1944 came up against the Japanese. This is the closest they ever got to Imphal, and they were seen off, knocked off this huge long ridge here on the 13th of April.
It was in this moment of crisis that the Allies' superior air power played a decisive factor. As the Japanese forces reached the foothills of the Nungchagum Saddle, the battle-hardened 5th Indian Division, recently flown in from the Arakan, were there to engage them. In the fighting on the 13th of April, every infantry and tank officer in action was either killed or wounded, leaving the NCOs to drive forward and win the day. In the finely balanced battle for Imphal, this was another close shave, but the winds of fortune had started to change.
So we're looking at Nungchagum feature. I mean, it's quite prominent, isn't it? But we're pretty close to Imphal here.
No, we are. In fact, so it's 8 miles away from the border, from the outskirts of Imphal, but it's less than that. It's 5 miles away from the headquarters of 4 Corps. So the nerve center of the entire British Indian force in Imphal, in Manipur, is just about 4 miles away.
Right. And so they're getting horribly close, aren't they?
They are getting horribly close. They're pathetically not defended. I mean, most of the reserves have gone down south because the Japanese they expected the Japanese to approach from the south. That's where the 4 Corps defenses, the reserves have gone. And this entire northeastern sector around Imphal is pretty much undefended. And the Japanese have a clear run towards Imphal. And we're now in the first week of April where this entire panorama that you can see behind me, the Japanese managed to get right on top of the highest peaks here. And they're practically overlooking Imphal, and they can see the 4 Corps headquarters from where they are.
It's within their grasp, isn't it?
And that's why actually the British reacted the way they did when they counterattacked on the 13th.
So with extreme
force,
determination
and with extreme with as many resources as they had, they threw in. Of course, they had the artillery. So they had the entire divisional artillery. They had
aircraft.
They had tanks. They had the infantry, and they didn't stop until they made sure that the Japanese were evicted from these heights of Nungchagum.
I mean, that's quite a feat of arms, isn't it, to knock them off that? I mean, you can see that's a really strong position to hold.
It's a strong position, and I think the masterstroke for the British was to manage to get tanks up there. So you've got medium tanks actually climbing up to those two peaks right behind me. They just did not expect to encounter armor on the heights of Nungshigum. You know, they expected to fight with the infantry. They expected that. But when they saw these tanks coming at them, they could do nothing to defend themselves, which is why ultimately the British prevailed on this feature because of the use of tanks. It was not the Air Force, it was not the artillery. It's actually because they managed to get the tanks so close to the bunkers that they were able to to get the Japanese out of there.
So that fighting on the 13th of April, that's pretty crucial.
That is crucial because I think the Japanese were never able to pose the kind of danger they posed to Imphal at that time. When you've got all of the defences in a bit of disarray, you've got the Japanese really
a little bit off balance, the British defenders.
A little bit off balance. You know, you've got reinforcements coming in, but they haven't really got settled in. So they're throwing the reinforcements, trying to plug the gaps. The Japanese have really got close. And close to an airfield, close to the headquarters, so it was really a crucial moment. And the fact that the Japanese were evicted saved the day, I would say.
So if they hadn't, if the Japanese had been able to break through here, what do you think would have happened?
Well, they'd managed. They would have got not just to within striking distance. They could have actually got to the perimeter of the 4 Corps headquarters. I mean, that's where the entire operation for all of Manipur, for the entire Battle of Imphal, was being directed from 4 Corps headquarters, and the Japanese would have gotten. You can imagine the consequences.
So disaster loomed.
Disaster would have loomed. Yeah, it did.
But while the airfield at Kangla was being saved by the heroics of the 5th Division, way to the north, things looked to be going increasingly awry as the Japanese army continued to stream across the border into India. We're also moving north, in the footsteps of the 14th Army, to another forgotten battlefield, and onto Kohima, the site of Slim's greatest challenge.
So we're heading north on the Imphal-Kohima road, and just on my right is the river valley, and then running parallel to the road is a series of hills, a sort of ridge line. It took the British forces a month to clear just 10 miles. Of course, it was exactly playing into Slim's hands. He wanted the Japanese to stay and fight because he wanted to defeat the 15th Army here, not in Burma.
Whilst on our way to the remote hill village of Shangshack, Hemant Singh Katoch has found something interesting that he wants to show us.
Shangshack. You can see the edges of Shangshack. This is amazing. And there's apparently also a biblical quotation: "He who reapeth receiveth wages." You should be able to see that somewhere.
Yes.
This is the Major Finch Road, constructed in 1942 to connect the tiny hill village of Shangshak with the larger town of Ukhrul. Today it feels remote and rudimentary. In 1942, it was an incredible testament to the ingenuity of British engineering and the toil of the local Naga people.
So Finch is an engineer, is he?
Finch is an
Yeah,
engineer.
he's a Royal Engineer.
Royal Engineer.
Or Royal Engineer?
Yeah, so it says Major Finch Road.
So he's the guy who's overseeing the construction.
Yeah.
In December
He's designed
42.
it. He probably
42, and then I think it gets completed, and that's the date of
May
43 as well.
Yeah.
That's where the inscription also.
But added on to by the hill people. So it says we hill people. No,
So what happened is that they employed local Nagas to build
construct
the
it.
road. So Major Finch surveyed it, laid it all out, and gave money to the Nagas to come and build it. And they built the road. And he was clearly the overseer,
Right.
the Naga overseer, who was responsible for putting this up.
a handful of
Yeah, amazing.
What's amazing is this stone marker still survives.
Yeah.
But this road, as I said, this road is abandoned now for the most part because the people use the newer road.
So it's surprising that this is still here and hasn't just been pushed over and knocked away. It needs
No one
protecting.
uses this. Yeah, it needs protecting.
And for me, it's the events that took place here that are too often overlooked when evaluating the outcome of the bigger battle.
I mean, the interesting thing about that is the regiment that gets peeled off is the 58th, which is the kind of the lead regiment, which is supposed to be attacking Kohima. And when they do eventually start attacking Kohima, it is still the 58th, having already done this detour here and taken really quite horrific casualties of at least 1,000 men, casualties minimum. In this, so that is, if you think a regiment is the equivalent of a British brigade, so you're talking 3 battalions, 800, 900 men each, that's a third of their fighting force gone just like that up here.
Before they even arrive at Kohima.
But at the same time, you also have to sort of think about the poor old 50th Indian Parachute Brigade and that company on that hill, the C Company of the 153rd, which is the Indian-based battalion. So there's a Gurkha-based battalion, an Indian-based battalion, and then there's the 4th, 5th Marathis. The whole of that company is wiped out. So that's 120 men gone, just like that, in that encircled hill. So they're neutralising it, but they decide to neutralise it when it's not, strictly speaking, on their turf, so that they absolutely know it gets done, I presume, rather than giving it to the 15th Division, who might not respond to it. Or it might just be a whole sort of ego thing from the commanders. I mean, that's your view, isn't it? I mean, it could be a combination of factors, but whatever reason it is, you can't just leave a brigade there, because they know the British do have the capacity for airdrops, and they can only get stronger. So you have to deal with it. You have to turn and deal with it. And how you deal with it and how long you take it, how long it takes to deal with that, is of massive significance, because what you have to remember about the Ugo offensive is everything is on the time scale. It's bum, 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 bum. Got to get from A to B, got to be on this point by this point, you've got to overwhelm them, knock your enemy off balance, completely annihilate them quickly before they have a chance to recover their balance. That's the whole key to understanding the whole battle. And the monsoon, but particularly to not allow Slim to rebalance and regain his balance when he's been knocked off balance. And so that's why speed is so essential. And also the other reason speed is essential is because they're only carrying a certain amount of rations. So the more days they have, the further they've got to spread those rations. The delay is actually more important than the casualties in many ways.
It is.
Of course, the real treasure here is not just the marker stone, but the actual road itself.
But what's amazing about it is this is an original Second World War cut rough road. This is a jeep track. You know, you could send lorries and jeeps down this, and obviously infantry as well, and mules and so on. But this is what you're dealing with logistically. And for me, just standing here now, it's just amazing, because here we are in the hills, really in the middle of nowhere, and it just underlines to me how incredibly difficult it must have been to supply forward troops. I mean, think about it. If you're the 50th Indian Infantry Brigade up there on that hill over there, you've got to be supplied with everything coming up these roads. You know, that's your meals, that's your water, that's your cigarettes, that's your malaria tablets, and your ammunition, and everything else that you need, and radio equipment and so on. Everything has to come up tracks like this. And it just makes you realise how difficult and how logistically challenging it was operating here in this kind of countryside. Not at all dissimilar to what you're going to find in Burma, but jungle-clad hills of Manipur and Burma. Just amazing. So there's Shangshack. You can just see on the distance, sort of glinting, the crinkly iron roofs. And this valley here, this is the route of the 50th Indian Parachute Brigade's retreat. I mean, can you imagine it after 4 brutal days of valley to then have to trek through this, which, you know, in the valley floor is pretty thick jungle. That's seriously hardcore. Amazing, I just don't know how they did it. But what a view. Well, we just stopped on our way to Shangshack, and we're looking back over the plain here, and you can see it so clearly how it's all laid out. And we're really lucky to be going to Shangshack. And this was a scene of a major engagement, and one that massively held up the Japanese advance, and particularly not just on Imphal, but on Kohima as well. But you can see just over there, there's a soldier, and it sort of underlines the point that this is still heavily guarded and an area that has just been completely closed to all Western visitors until incredibly recently. So we're very lucky to be getting up there.
On the 19th of March 1944, the untested 50th Indian Parachute Brigade took over positions in these hills.
We're now turning around the last final bends before we reach Shangshak village, and I've got to say, you feel incredibly high up and remote, and the jungle's getting ever thicker. And what's crossing my mind is, what a place to fight. I mean, goodness me. I wouldn't fancy this one bit.
It was meant to be a quiet holding position and nothing more. Little did they know that the front line was coming to them. All too soon, they found themselves directly in the way of the Japanese 31st Division as it swept from the east, heading from the tiny village of Kohima. The leading elements of the Japanese 58th Regiment clashed with C Company, the 502nd Battalion, on March the 17th. Surrounded, the Indians fought ferociously, but were slaughtered. The British commander, Brigadier William Hope Thompson, just 31 years old, now knew he was facing a sizable Japanese formation. Cut off, and with barely enough supplies, he decided to bring his men together here at Shangshack to make his stand and face the fury of attack.
Whereas if you don't have wire, you've got horrible gaps into which Japanese can infiltrate unless you've got literally every 5 yards protected. And that's a fault that's the problem of not having wire that Hope Thompson faces. Because what is the alternative? The alternative is only one thing, and that is very dense manning of men, which means you are simply going to take the hits.
Shangshack is a thriving Naga village in the hills to the northeast of Imphal. It's peaceful today, and hard to imagine the scenes of devastation during the Second World War. We've been invited up to a local Naga hut, where our guide, Yai Kangjam, has somebody very special for us to meet. Incredibly, there are still people living here who remember the events of March 1944.
This man here, V.R. Ajib, he is the man who experienced the Second World War time here, and to keep his memories alive, he had composed a song of the Second World War, and the song involves every party: Japanese, INA, British, Indian, Marathas, and Gurkhas as well. So he composed it 2 years ago. Now that song is being used as a village song, community song, every year in India festival.
Fantastic.
So he's going to sing it for us.
Even better.
O Subhash Chandra Bose na Japan Prime Minister Tozo Lirai mi Bamasa Ke Pingarai mi Japan mi Pinchi O Sing Sho Ke Pong Na Ngre Sho Oh, 1944, tình cung vi. Oh, mẹ yo cái chân li, predisli, sang sang li, Japan rai sa khan vi bang. Ke pinga Japan rai mi che pai ping chi. Oh, India khan mang ngar mi ye. Oh, Brigadier Thompson thanda. Oh, 50 para for Maratha. Shibai ling so the Japan li raisa. Ka pinga Japan. Rai mi she pai ping chi o mang la ke chung ke man ho o British rai mi na yu ho da o Shangshack phong rai le British li na so da atam ke shi ka pam ro ma Ke pingarai mi Japan she pai ping chi wo mang la ke chung ka man ho o nga hong li ke chang she ni pa da October ke chang she hanong Shangshack we mi ring sai ke si rai chin ma lai me rai mi she bai ping chi wo lai ra
It was all very sudden to them because they didn't even get a hint that the war is coming. One day, the Gurkhas, the Nepalis, were the first to arrive at Shangshak. So they just they were just telling the people around. They didn't force anybody to leave the village, but the Gurkhas just told them that the war is coming, and they passed through Shangshak. But then, after 2-3 days, the Marathas arrived. Then the Marathas were the one who dropped the people out from the village, like forcibly. And
Said you got to leave.
Yes, you got to leave. And now, there were many big trees all over the village, but everything was burned down. Many houses were burned down, and the food items and all, they were all burned down. And when they leave the village, they didn't even get the time to collect their clothes and the food and all. So they were all sent to the jungle. Yeah. And then the battle starts the next day, means around the 20th of March or something. They left the village. So 22nd of March, the attack starts and the battle starts. So one of the villagers who came here to collect food, he was shot dead by the British because they suspected him to be Japanese. So when he was entering the village, they shot him. And he got wounded, and then when he went back to the jungle, he died there. All of them taking shelter in the jungle, and then suddenly there was an aircraft coming and dropping bombs. But one of the officers, British officers, instructed the villagers here that whenever you see any aeroplanes coming, just open your Naga shawls, tribal clothes which they use normally, so that the planes can know that these are tribal local people who should not be harmed. So that was the preventive measure for them.
And did it work?
Yeah, it worked, I think. Yeah, that's what he told me.
Thank you.
It's been fascinating to talk to Verzip, who was alive during the war, and not only alive, was actually kicked out of the village forcibly when 50th Indian Brigade came here and set up their last stand. All the buildings were burned and destroyed. You know, he had to go and live in the jungle for 2 to 3 months, living off leaves and whatever they could scavenge. And when they came back, the whole place was littered with corpses of men and mules and also equipment. And it's very easy to think of these battles in terms of the men that were involved directly in the fighting and just forget that this typhoon of war was sweeping over the lands of the Naga people too, and that they suffered every bit as much.
As well as its incredible personal testimony, the jungle surrounding the village still offers more evidence of its own.
Oh, hang on a minute. Look at all this. This is clearly a trench here. Oh, look, and it goes all the way down here. It's a little bit more overgrown than it would have been, and they would have cleared fields of fire in front of them, but what's amazing is how extensive these positions are. Yeah, it stops here, so you would have had a machine gun post here, I would imagine. And yeah, and this is linking up to sort of higher, more trenches up beyond. The amazing thing about this is that it's so much more extensive than I'd realised, and of course completely forgotten about since 1944. The only people who know about this are the Naga people that live in the village still. But you know, that's not a bad effort to dig trenches this extensive in just a few days before the Japanese attacked. Really, they had such little time to prepare for the onslaught. But these guys were working hard, as if their lives depended upon it. And boy, did they.
The first major assault on the position came on the evening of the 22nd of March.
The Japanese attacked in the open in the evening light straight across that saddle here and in full view of the waiting Gurkhas poised just behind me. And then they opened fire and it was an absolute slaughter. One observer said it was like an optical illusion as men tumbled in front of one another. Some 90 were killed outright just like that. That's nearly the entire company wiped out.
The Japanese attacks were incessant. For 4 days and 4 nights, the defenders grimly held on. Finally, on the 26th of March, Hope Thompson was given the order to try and break out. At 11 p.m, having fired the last of their shells, they put into action their withdrawal.
So Rob, you know, the commander of the 50th Indian Parachute Brigade was criticised for the sighting of his last stand, but I'm looking at this and I'm thinking that's about as good as it gets.
He actually did a brilliant job. He chose a single central high peak. He put all-round defence on it. He knew the Japanese would come to it like
hornets.
Absolutely, and it was it was a very good defensive position. He had lots of interlocking fields of fire. He had troops all around the area, and in order to be able to take this, the Japanese would have had to throw everything they had at it. It's a superb defensive position.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of be here for 4 days and 4 nights and just withstand everything that's coming your way when you know that your own casualties are piling up all around you, that takes guts, doesn't it?
So think of the psychology of it. You can see your own troops getting wounded. You can see the Japanese troops out in front of you, dead and dying. No one's picking them up. There were 2 major consequences of this incredible battle. The first was, as you say, it slowed down the 31st Division by 4 days. So they lost troops, but actually it slowed them down. And Slim and Stopford had the opportunity of reinforcing Kohima in a way that they wouldn't have done had this battle not taken place. But of course, it also slowed down the advance of the 15th Japanese Division on Imphal, caused them casualties, alerted the defenders. When this battle began, the 4-Corps commander, Geoffrey Scoons in Imphal, had no idea that the Japanese were going to come anywhere near this place at all. So the stand of the Parachute Brigade and the Maharajas here was extraordinarily important to the rest of the battle. What it did is it took the oomph out of their advance. And the story of these 3 or 4 days here of the mass charges by the Japanese was just reflective of that reality. They couldn't believe that they were coming up against the troops that they had prepared for, and they threw everything they had at it. And it slowed them down and knocked the stuffing out of them.
The other thing that has just struck me so strongly is how no one knows this battle. You know, it's such a key part of the wider Imphal battle, this engagement here, this 4 days of bitter bloody fighting, and yet no one knows about it.
During the battle, of course, no one was there to write the history, and there was such a lot going on around Imphal that the story of this fantastic last stand was lost completely. And it was only by the endeavours of historians in the 70s and 80s who unravelled it and put it together again, and they've allowed us the privilege of really understanding what took place here and of its real significance. And that's the point about this battle. I mean, we know such a lot about it, but there's a lot that we still don't know. It hasn't been recorded in the same way that battles have, you know, across Europe and other places. This is a forgotten battlefield still of a forgotten army.
The Battle of Shangshack had cost both sides dearly, but I believe the events there had a direct impact on what was to follow in Kohima. Today, Kohima is a sprawling concrete jungle and home to 150,000 people. In 1944, there was only a small Naga village and a few British buildings on Kohima Ridge, also known as Garrison Hill. The village lay on the road between Imphal and Dimapur, along a saddle much lower than the surrounding hills. This made it vulnerable. The Japanese had now cut the road in several places. Imphal was besieged, but to the north, so too was Kohima. By the 5th of April, some 13,000 Japanese troops were bearing down on the area, which was defended by just 2,500 men, of which 1,000 were non-combatants. But the incredible stand down at Shangshack had given the troops in Kohima a lifeline. Without the defense of the Indian paratroopers, the Japanese 31st Division would have reached Kohima a week earlier in much stronger numbers, and would likely have overrun the British defenders stationed there. As it was, the Royal West Kents and the Assams made up the 2 battalions that were left to defend Kohima. 1,500 men against a force almost 10 times that size. By the 18th of April, the defenders were struggling to hold a small perimeter on Garrison Hill when the position was split by the Japanese. In the nick of time, the Indian 2nd Division started to arrive from Dimapur with heavy artillery, and the position was relieved. A final near disaster had been averted.
By the time the 2nd Division took over, this whole place round here was a picture of just indescribable destruction and filth. The fighting had been just the very worst kind. Close quarter, hand to hand, and the stench of rotting bodies and smoke ever present.
Nowhere on Kohima has come to symbolise the terrible fighting more than at the tennis court, still preserved, and now at the heart of the Commonwealth War Grave Commission Cemetery.
By the beginning of May, there was absolutely nothing left of the District Commissioner's bungalow, nor any other building in Kohima for that matter, while the tennis court here was scene of some of the most brutal fighting in the entire battle.
The fighting was bitter, bloody, and at close quarters. It was also witness to an act of breathtaking bravery by Lance Corporal Jack Harmon of the Royal West Kents.
It's just incredible how much Kohima has changed, but back in 1944, this was just a scene of devastation. Not a single building anywhere, no track, no road or anything. That is DIS Hill, behind me is Jail Hill, and it's just up there on that little knoll over there that Jack Harmon won his VC. He was absolutely convinced he wasn't going to die, which was one of the reasons maybe that he was so reckless, because single-handedly he jumped up out of his foxhole, out of his trench, and charged across at this Japanese machine gun, bayonet fixed, took out all the Japanese that were manning the machine gun, and then casually walked back, brandishing the machine gun above his head. And that was the point where he was shot.
The 14th Army suffered 24,000 casualties, many of whom recovered thanks to the improved medical care Slim had insisted upon. Conversely, of the 85,000 Japanese troops that had crossed into India, 30,000 lay dead, with a further 23,000 casualties.
As a historian, it's easy to talk airily of divisions and brigades and battalions, but when you're in these cemeteries, you realise it's about individuals who have come this vast distance from England and Britain. Oh gosh, look at this. C.E. Culverwell, the Dorset Regiment, so this is local regiment to me. 1st of May 1944, age 24, it says, "Dear Charlie, to the world you were only a soldier, to us you were all the world." It's just too sad for words.
It's in Kohima that Slim's master plan came closest to failing, and had it not been for the 4-day delay at Shangshack, Mutaguchi may well have prevailed. Now at the end of our journey, I've come up here to reflect on events with Rob Lyman.
Gosh, this isn't what I was expecting. You know, this is a town that's grown from just a few huts, isn't it?
It's an extraordinary place because in 1944, the only built-up area was where we're standing now, which is Kohima village on Naga Hill. And the village was on top of the hill. It wasn't as extensive as it is now. And of course, as we look over modern Kohima, it's a modern, sprawling northeastern Indian large town. And it's actually quite difficult now to identify exactly where everything is because of the buildings. But actually, the topography of the ground does allow us to have a good idea of where everything was in 1944. But it's very different now.
What's so astonishing to me, Rob, though, is that it's so small. I mean, Garrison Hill is tiny. I mean, I know that it's, you know, sort of dwarfed by the spread of Kohima, modern-day Kohima, but it's tiny, isn't it? And to think that they took some 64 days to clear that entire ridge is just astonishing.
One of the characteristics of all the battlefields here is when the combat begins, it's over a very, very small patch of ground.
And in those early first days of the battle here, I mean, the British defenders, the Royal West Kents, they're completely surrounded, aren't they?
The extraordinary thing about this battlefield is that it was not designed for defence. When the Japanese arrived, of course, they came straight up here. On the first day of the attack on the 4th of April, 1944, they came right up onto Naga Hill, killed a number of Nepalese soldiers who were here, and that gave them a marvellous view over here. And then the attacks on the following day began on the rapidly developing defences there. And the truth is that by the time the fighting finished, 9th or 10th of June, and the Japanese began to withdraw, the 2nd Division were exhausted. The entire campaign here can really and should be seen in two parts. The first is the siege, in which...
And that's that first 2 weeks?
It's the first 2 weeks. It's the period from the morning of the 4th of April all the way through to the 22nd of April, where these 2,500 men held off the Japanese onslaught for 2.5 weeks.
And it's just attack after attack after attack.
It was constant. It was day and night. The Japanese, one of the greatest Japanese strengths was their ability to bypass enemy positions, but not in Kohima. They decided that they were going to stop in Kohima and they needed to remove the British entirely, and they threw everything they had at it. And remember, this is the Japanese who had marched through these incredible jungle wastes for 120 miles from the Chinwin, bypassing Shangshack, having a significant engagement at Shangshack for 4 days from the 22nd to the 26th of March, and they now land here and they fight with incredible ferocity to move these stubborn British off the hill. And it has to be said that they were very, very nearly successful. So the position was stabilised, but the battle had not been won. The Battle of Kohima carried on. So we talk about the Siege of Kohima.
That's the 2 weeks.
And then the battle started, and it raged from the 22nd of April and ran all the way through to probably about the 9th or 10th of June.
Imphal remained besieged, but Slim was now confident that he was back on track with his original plan. At Kohima, on the Shenam Saddle, on the Tiddim Road, and on the road north, the Japanese supply lines were stretched, and they were being ground down. With his own supply lines now secure and reinforced, Slim knew that the Japanese would keep on fighting. It had become a game of time and numbers, and now there could be only one winner. On the 22nd of June 1944, British forces met on the Imphal-Kohima road. Finally, after 64 days of ferocious fighting, the road was cleared. The siege was over.
At the very end of the Imphal battle, the shattered remnants of the 31st and 15th Japanese divisions passed down through that valley there, the very same valley on which they'd advanced with such expectations of an easy victory just a few months before. You can just imagine what they must have been thinking, can't you? You know, demoralised, leaving so many comrades dead on the battlefields behind them. It's really a wonder that any of them ever managed to get to Burma at all.
On the 20th of July, Mutaguchi gave orders for the survivors to fall back across the River Chindwin. His dreams of becoming the conqueror of India were over.
By anyone's judgment, this was a stunning victory and a complete vindication of Slim's strategy. Hard fighting remained. The long campaign of reconquest would go on well into 1945. But I've been stunned by what I've discovered here. And I've been amazed by the viciousness of the fighting, the tactical skill, and just the barefaced courage of those who fought here.
Throughout the spring of 1944, momentum swung back and forth like a pendulum between the two sides.
And yet it was Slim's men who were victorious, and Mutaguchi's army was effectively destroyed.
When Slim was appointed in October 1943, the cause looked lost and the task simply to resist the Japanese for as long as possible. Yet against all odds, within the space of just 20 months, he completely transformed his army, won a historic victory, and revitalized the war in the East.
So yes, it was Britain's greatest battle.